The cold, biting wind stung my bare feet as I stood outside, snow swirling around me, making it difficult to breathe. My brother, Nathan, and his wife Janet had just forced me out of the house, throwing my belongings into the snow without remorse. I stood there in disbelief, my heart pounding not only from the freezing air, but from the sheer shock of what had just happened. The house that had been my only shelter, the home I had known my entire life, was now locked to me. They didn't care that I had been the one caring for our mother, nor did they acknowledge the sacrifices I made every day. The humiliation of being kicked out was overwhelming, but something inside me ignited a fire. One day, I would make them regret this. I had nothing, no education, no stable health, and no wealth. But what I did have was my inner strength, and I clung to it with all my might. Growing up, I had always been close to my mother, Linda. She raised us single-handedly after our father left when we were young. I remember her strength, working tirelessly to give Nathan and me a better life. Nathan, being older, always had a certain charm about him. People believed in him. He started his own business in his mid-20s, turning recycled plastics and driftwood into eco-friendly home decor. His business was an instant success, and soon he was doing very well for himself. But as the money rolled in, something changed. Nathan became cold, calculating, and greedy. His success bred a sense of entitlement, and he began looking down on me, the sickly younger sister who never amounted to much in his eyes. Even though I lived with our mother, taking care of her as her health declined, Nathan never offered to help. In fact, he took advantage of my situation. I suffered from an autoimmune disease that had plagued me since middle school. It caused my health to be fragile, requiring me to be on medication just to function normally. Despite this, I worked hard, taking on part-time jobs that offered me enough to scrape by while saving for emergencies. Nathan, however, saw my illness and my modest life as weaknesses. He taunted me, calling me a burden, reminding me that I would never survive without him. Our mother, bedridden with early-onset dementia, didn't have the strength to stop him. Nathan began coming to our house more often, not to help, but to exploit the situation. He would take food from our fridge, steal money from my wallet, and leave me feeling helpless. Janet, his wife, was no better. She treated me like I was invisible, acting as though their presence in our home was a favor to me rather than an intrusion. It was only the beginning of their manipulation. One day, Nathan and Janet dropped a bombshell. They were moving in. Without even asking for my permission, they took over the house. They claimed they had given up their apartment to save money, and now they would be staying with us permanently. I was horrified, but what could I do? My mother was in no condition to oppose them, and I didn't have the means to fight back. From that point on, the house no longer felt like mine. Nathan and Janet brought nothing but stress into my life. They contributed nothing to the household expenses and forced me to do all the chores, including their laundry, cooking, and cleaning. They treated me like a servant in my own home. The stress of their constant demands took a toll on my health, and I began to feel the strain of my illness more intensely. I was getting weaker, suffering from fevers and insomnia, but they didn't care. Despite my worsening health, I still went to work every day, trying to hold on to what little independence I had left. But then, tragedy struck. My mother, who had been battling dementia, caught a cold that quickly turned into pneumonia. She was hospitalized, and within weeks, she passed away. Her death hit me hard, but I barely had time to grieve. The stress of losing her, combined with the strain of living with Nathan and Janet, pushed my body to its limits. I fell ill and had to take strong medication to recover. My immune system weakened even more, and I was forced to stay home from work to recuperate. It was then that my employer called and informed me that they couldn't keep me on due to the many days I had missed. I was devastated. I had lost my mother, my health was deteriorating, and now I had lost my job. When I told Nathan and Janet that I had lost my job, they were furious. How could you quit? Nathan barked at me, as though I had done something wrong. Janet, always calculating, asked coldly, "If you're not working, who's going to pay for the household expenses?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been paying for everything while they contributed nothing, and now they had the audacity to question me about money. I told them that if they wanted to continue living here, they would need to start contributing to the bills. Nathan and Janet exchanged smug looks. Component placement, and then Nathan said something that made my blood run cold. "We're not paying anything. We moved in to save money, and you're just an extra burden. It's cheaper if it's just the two of us." Janet nodded in agreement, her eyes narrowing as she added, "You're the one who needs to leave." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never imagined that my own brother, the person I had grown up with, could be so cruel. I was still reeling from their callousness when Nathan physically grabbed me and dragged me toward the front door. "Get out," he sneered, shoving me outside without a second thought. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was left standing in the snow, barefoot and without a place to go. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. I had paid for the living expenses, cared for our mother until her last breath, and yet they treated me like garbage. But as I stood there in the freezing cold, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them break me. I had survived worse, and I would survive this. With nothing but the clothes on my back and a few belongings, I left the house that had once been my home. I spent the next few days wandering, unsure of where to go. Eventually, I found shelter in a train station, a place where I could stay out of the cold. During the day, I scoured through job magazines, desperate to find something that could help me get back on my feet. My body was weak, and I knew I shouldn't be taking on physically demanding work, but I had no other choice. I found a job on a farm, where they offered room and board in exchange for labor. The work was hard, but the family who owned the farm was kind. They soon realized that I had a chronic illness and made adjustments to ensure I wasn't overexerting myself. It was the first time in a long while that I felt a sense of peace. Working with the earth, surrounded by nature, gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. As I settled into life on the farm, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal from Nathan and Janet still stung, but I realized that it had pushed me toward a new path. I had spent years feeling like I was stuck, trapped in a cycle of caretaking and survival. But now, I had the freedom to build something new for myself. While working on the farm, I noticed that many of the vegetables we harvested had parts that were considered waste. I began experimenting with these discarded scraps, turning them into pickled vegetables and teas. The idea of reducing food waste resonated with the farm owners, and they encouraged me to develop my concept further. Soon, I was not only working on the farm, but also starting to create products from the crops that were being thrown away. It was the beginning of something I never thought possible. With the farm owners' support, I started my own small business. Using the discarded parts of crops, I made and sold processed goods like pickled vegetables, jams, and herbal teas. The concept of reducing food waste was still relatively new at the time, but it quickly gained traction. Within a few years, my business was flourishing. I had gone from being homeless and jobless to running a company that was making a real impact. By the time I turned 30, my company had grown significantly, with annual sales exceeding $20 million. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, proving to myself and to the world that I was capable of more than anyone had ever given me credit for. I didn't just survive the ordeal with Nathan and Janet. I thrived because of it. And as my company grew, so did my confidence. I was no longer the helpless little sister they had kicked out into the cold. A decade passed, and I had long since severed ties with Nathan and Janet. Then, one day, I received an unexpected phone call from a local news station. They wanted to feature my company on a segment about entrepreneurs tackling environmental issues. I agreed, and a week later, I found myself at the TV studio. As I was preparing to leave after the interview, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in years.